Have you ever wondered why some texts hit differently in those quiet hours after midnight? That text at 3 a.m. isn't just any message, it's a portal straight to his heart. Those vulnerable early morning hours when the world sleeps hold a secret power that few understand. The 3 a.m. text works because it catches him in his most authentic state, when walls come down and true feelings surface. This isn't about manipulation. It's about creating the perfect moment for honesty. Tonight, I'm sharing the exact words that will make him finally confess what he's been holding back. This isn't random advice. This is a psychological blueprint based on how men process emotions when their defenses are lowered. By the end of this video, you'll know the precise message that unlocks his deepest feelings, the perfect timing that maximizes your chances, and exactly how to respond when he finally opens up. This isn't just about getting those three special words. It's about creating a genuine connection that turns existing attraction into something deeper. The response rate to this specific message is remarkable because it taps into something primal and true. Something remarkable happens to human psychology after midnight. People who maintain careful emotional walls during daylight hours suddenly find those barriers thinning as night deepens. This shift isn't random. It follows predictable patterns backed by psychological research into how our brains function throughout daily cycles. Night brings natural vulnerability through physical tiredness. Mental energy depletes throughout the day, with willpower and self-control functioning like muscles that fatigue with use. By late evening, these emotional regulators weaken significantly. Men especially maintain careful guards during daytime social interactions, but these defenses require constant energy to maintain. Nighttime removes social performance pressure. Daily life demands constant impression management at work, in public, even with friends. Each interaction follows subtle social rules requiring mental calculation about appropriate responses. After midnight, this audience disappears. No one watches, judges, or evaluates. This freedom creates space for authenticity impossible during socially observed hours. Darkness itself triggers psychological opening. Since earliest human history, nighttime conversations around fires created intimate bonds through story sharing. This evolutionary pattern remains coded in our psychology. Darkness signals safety for truth-telling. Modern research confirms people disclose significantly more personal information in dimly lit environments versus brightly lit ones. Circadian rhythms directly impact emotional processing. As day transitions to night, brain chemistry shifts. Cortisol stress hormone levels naturally decrease while melatonin increases. This chemical balance creates conditions where emotional centers activate more readily than analytical ones. Thoughts become less logical, more associative, and emotionally driven. Digital communication amplifies this vulnerability effect. Text messages create psychological distance that paradoxically increases emotional safety. People reveal thoughts through text they might never speak aloud. This combination, nighttime vulnerability plus textual distance, creates perfect conditions for emotional honesty. Sleep deprivation plays a surprising role in emotional disclosure. Studies show moderate tiredness actually increases emotional expressiveness by reducing inhibition between thoughts and speech. This slight filter reduction helps truths surface that might otherwise remain buried beneath social consideration. Men particularly experience stronger effects from these nighttime vulnerability patterns. Cultural expectations restrict male emotional expression during regular hours. Many men report only feeling permission to express deeper feelings during these boundary hours. Not quite today, not yet tomorrow, when regular rules seem temporarily suspended. Late night conversations create liminal space between conscious and subconscious thought. This twilight mental state resembles the hypnagogic period before sleep when creative connections form and emotional insights surface. What remains carefully partitioned during daylight flows more freely during these threshold hours when logical defenses weaken. People in relationships often notice something magical happens around 3 a.m. This specific hour sits in a sweet spot between late night and early morning, when psychological barriers naturally fall away. During regular daytime hours, we maintain carefully constructed personas, professional, composed, and guarded. But something shifts in those quiet hours when the world goes still. At 3 a.m., brain chemistry actually changes. Sleep researchers have found that melatonin levels peak while cortisol, our stress hormone, reaches its lowest point. This creates a unique mental state where emotional defenses weaken and authentic feelings rise to the surface. He's not actively trying to hide his feelings anymore, he simply can't. Time itself feels different at 3 a.m. There's a sense that regular rules don't apply when everyone else is asleep. This creates a bubble where intimate conversations feel safer and more private than they would during daylight hours. Social pressure disappears in these twilight moments. When his phone lights up at 3 a.m., it triggers immediate curiosity. Late night messages carry an inherent sense of urgency and importance. His mind instantly wonders why you're reaching out at this unusual hour, creating the perfect opening for meaningful connection. Many men struggle expressing vulnerability during normal conversations. They've been conditioned to maintain emotional control. But 3 a.m. exists outside normal social hours, giving him permission to step outside those constraints. His natural response becomes more honest, more raw, more real. Brain scans show our analytical left brain functions decrease at night, while our emotional right brain becomes more active. This shift makes him more receptive to emotional language and less likely to overthink his response to your message. He'll react from his heart rather than his head. There's also something deeply intimate about connecting with someone while the rest of the world sleeps. It creates a sense that this conversation exists just for the two of you, strengthening the bond and making emotional confessions feel natural rather than forced. Texting rather than calling provides another layer of safety. He can take those few extra seconds to find the right words without the pressure of immediate response that comes with phone conversations. This combination of timing and medium creates the perfect conditions for emotional honesty. Sending that 3 a.m. text doesn't work in isolation. It needs fertile emotional ground. This technique fails without establishing genuine connection first. Those everyday conversations matter just as much as that final message. Pay attention to how he responds when you share personal stories or vulnerable moments. Does he engage meaningfully or change subjects? His pattern reveals readiness for deeper connection. Mixed signals often indicate he has feelings, but hesitates to express them. Look for those contradictions, canceling plans but then checking in frequently, maintaining physical distance while seeking emotional closeness. These inconsistencies suggest internal conflict between protecting himself and pursuing connection. Track conversation depth over time. Gradually introduce more meaningful topics between lighthearted exchanges. Discuss childhood memories, future hopes, or personal fears. Each vulnerable share builds trust. Notice if he reciprocates by revealing parts of himself normally kept hidden. Emotional readiness shows through small gestures. He remembers details from previous conversations. He checks in when you're sick or facing challenges. He shares music, articles, or content that reminded him of you. These seemingly minor actions indicate he's emotionally invested beyond surface level. Timing matters beyond just the 3 a.m. hour. Life circumstances affect receptiveness to emotional conversations. Someone facing work stress, family issues, or personal crises may struggle connecting deeply. Wait for relatively stable periods when he has emotional bandwidth available. I had this dream about you creates immediate intrigue without feeling manipulative. Dreams exist in that same vulnerable mental space you're trying to access. This opening feels authentic because you're sharing something personal while inviting him into your inner world. This particular opening works because it triggers curiosity without pressure. He naturally wants to know more about appearing in your thoughts. This line creates perfect opportunity for deeper conversation without feeling forced or threatening. Men respond especially well to this approach because it feels like genuine sharing rather than an emotional ambush. Dream references also provide emotional safety for both sides. If the conversation becomes uncomfortable, either person can attribute meanings to dream logic rather than conscious feelings. This built-in safety net makes honest expression more likely since it reduces fear of rejection or awkwardness. Now, for crafting that perfect opening line at 3 a.m., something that captures attention without seeming calculated. I just woke up thinking about you works brilliantly because it combines timing with emotional honesty. This phrase immediately establishes why you're texting at such an unusual hour while creating instant intrigue. What makes this opening powerful is its simplicity. No gimmicks, no games, just a straightforward expression that invites connection. Men respond instinctively to directness when it comes wrapped in vulnerability. It signals authentic emotion rather than strategic manipulation. Something magical happens when someone receives those words at 3 a.m. Their mind immediately fills with questions. What were you thinking about? Why did it wake you? What feelings prompted this message? This natural curiosity creates an opening for deeper conversation without you having to force it. Authenticity comes from specificity. Adding a small detail makes your message feel genuinely spontaneous rather than pre-planned. I just woke up thinking about that conversation we had last week. Or, I just woke up thinking about how you made me laugh yesterday, grounds your message in shared reality. Equally important is what this opening line avoids. It doesn't demand immediate response or place pressure. It doesn't manipulate through jealousy or games. It doesn't create artificial urgency. Instead, it simply opens a door he can choose to walk through. Men, particularly, value feeling chosen without conditions. This opening line communicates that he specifically came to mind during an unguarded moment. Not because you needed something, not because you were comparing him to others, simply because he organically appeared in your thoughts. Another variation that works beautifully is can't sleep. And my mind keeps coming back to something about you. This creates similar intrigue while acknowledging the unusual hour. It feels confessional rather than calculated. Body language matters even in text messages. Short, simple sentences mimic natural late-night speech patterns. Avoid overly perfect grammar or complex phrasing. It will feel rehearsed. Slight imperfections like an extra dot in an ellipsis or a missing apostrophe actually enhance authenticity. Timing between messages matters too. Allow natural pauses, as if you're genuinely formulating thoughts rather than following a script. If responses come too quickly, the conversation feels predetermined rather than organic. Authenticity requires patience. Rushing undermines the entire approach. After he responds to your opening line, it's time for that middle message, the emotional catalyst that transforms curiosity into genuine feeling. This message needs to connect past experiences with present emotions while hinting at future possibilities. Something reminded me of that moment when we, followed by a specific shared experience, creates instant emotional transportation. His brain literally activates the same neural pathways from when that memory first formed. This neurological response brings those original feelings rushing back with surprising intensity. Choose memories involving physical proximity but emotional safety, times when connection felt easy and natural. Perhaps sitting together, watching a sunset, laughing over inside jokes, or comfortable silence during a long drive. These moments typically hold emotional significance without obvious romantic pressure. Words that evoke sensory details strengthen emotional impact significantly. Mentioning how something felt, sounded, or even smelled anchors memories in physical reality. I can still hear exactly how you laughed when, or I keep thinking about how peaceful it felt when, triggers vivid mental recreation of that experience. Vulnerability in your middle message opens space for his vulnerability in return. Sharing something slightly uncomfortable, a small insecurity or private thought, signals this conversation exists outside normal social rules. I never told you this, but I felt creates immediate emotional intimacy. Indirect expressions of value work better than direct compliments. Instead of, "you're so funny," try, "nobody makes me laugh like you do." Rather than, "you're smart," say, "I love how your mind works." These comparatives demonstrate he specifically matters rather than possessing generic positive qualities. Emotional contrasts create powerful resonance. Mentioning how different you feel with him versus without him highlights his unique impact. Days feel different when we talk, or I notice this emptiness when we go too long without connecting, acknowledges his significance without demanding reciprocation. Questions that invite self-reflection rather than immediate answers work powerfully here. Do you ever find yourself thinking about our conversations at random moments? Plants the suggestion while giving him space to consider without pressure. Timing between messages should slow slightly during this phase. Allow extra moments for emotional processing. What feels like uncomfortable silence to you gives him critical time to recognize and process feelings that might otherwise remain subconscious. Each word should feel chosen specifically for him based on your unique connection. Generic phrases from relationship advice columns fail because they lack personal resonance. Only references to actual shared experiences carry authentic emotional weight. Now comes that crucial final message, the one that creates the perfect opening for his confession. This last text needs to feel both emotionally safe yet impossible to ignore. Sometimes I wonder if what I feel for you is obvious, works with remarkable consistency because it simultaneously expresses vulnerability while creating an information gap he instinctively wants to fill. This specific phrasing accomplishes several psychological triggers at once. It acknowledges feelings exist without explicitly naming them, creating emotional safety through ambiguity. It suggests you might be harboring deeper emotions without directly stating them. And crucially, it introduces uncertainty he'll want to resolve. Men respond particularly strongly to this approach because it removes performance pressure. Instead of putting him on the spot with a direct question or declaration, it invites him into a conversation about existing feelings. The subtle wording suggests mutual emotion rather than one-sided declaration. Adding slight vulnerability amplifies effectiveness. It feels risky saying this at 3 a.m., but sometimes I wonder if what I feel for you is obvious. Acknowledges the unusual context while deepening emotional intimacy. This self-awareness makes your message feel authentic rather than calculated. Response psychology explains why this works so consistently. Humans instinctively seek to resolve cognitive gaps. Unanswered questions create mild psychological tension that seeks resolution. Your message creates precisely this type of tension. What exactly do you feel? Is it mutual? His mind cannot leave these questions unanswered. Timing matters tremendously for this final message. Send it after he's engaged with your previous texts, but before the conversation reaches any natural conclusion. This middle conversation placement feels organic rather than forced or scripted. Another variation with similar effectiveness is I've been trying to figure out what this feeling means when we, followed by reference to something specific you do together. This grounds emotional discussion in concrete reality while inviting his perspective on something you're both experiencing. Brain chemistry at 3 a.m. heightens this message's impact. His prefrontal cortex, responsible for analyzing social consequences, functions at reduced capacity, while his limbic system emotional processing remains fully active. This neurological state makes authentic emotional response more likely than calculated social consideration. Notice this approach never manipulates through jealousy, artificial scarcity, or emotional games. It works precisely because it creates space for genuine emotion rather than trying to force specific responses. The message respects his autonomy while making honesty feel like the natural path forward. Studies on emotional disclosure consistently show people feel relief after expressing long-held feelings. Your message creates perfect conditions for this psychological release, the satisfaction of finally saying what has remained unspoken, often for months or even years. When he finally opens up with those words you've been waiting to hear, how you respond in those crucial moments matters tremendously. First reactions create lasting emotional imprints. They become part of how both of you remember this turning point. Avoid immediately jumping to practical questions about relationship status or definitions. Instead, respond with emotional mirroring. Matching his vulnerability level shows you're meeting him in this exposed emotional state. If he's expressed deep feelings, acknowledge them with similar depth. If his confession feels tentative, match that gentleness without pushing for more than he's ready to give. Take a moment before responding. That brief pause communicates his words hold significance, requiring genuine consideration rather than automated response. This small silence actually amplifies emotional impact far more than immediate reaction. Validation comes before reciprocation. Thank you for telling me that, or it means a lot hearing you say that. Honors his courage before addressing your own feelings. Men rarely receive acknowledgement for emotional vulnerability. This recognition deepens trust significantly. Physical distance during this digital conversation actually helps maintain emotional authenticity. Without visual cues to navigate, both people focus exclusively on words, creating unusual emotional clarity. Text allows processing time impossible during in-person conversations. After validating his confession, share your genuine feelings without excessive elaboration. Simple, clear, emotional truth resonates more powerfully than lengthy explanations. "I've been feeling the same way," or "those words make me so happy," communicates everything necessary without diluting the moment. Questions that explore feeling depths rather than seeking definitions work best here. "When did you first realize?" or "What finally made you want to tell me?" invites him deeper into emotional territory while keeping conversation anchored in authentic experience rather than relationship logistics. Avoid premature, future focused questions about what happens next. This emotional moment exists in its own time bubble. Trying to immediately translate feelings into practical relationship steps diminishes their significance. Allow this confession space to simply exist before building upon it. Voice notes can add powerful dimension if conversation deepens significantly. Hearing emotion in your voice creates intimacy impossible through text alone. This transition from text to voice feels like natural progression rather than mode switch. Supporting his vulnerability afterward matters tremendously. Reference his confession positively in coming days without pressuring for repetition. Simple acknowledgments like, "I keep thinking about what you shared," reinforce that his emotional honesty was welcomed rather than merely tolerated. Throughout this exchange, prioritize authentic expression over strategic response. This conversation marks transition from potential connection to genuine intimacy. Treating it as milestone rather than negotiation honors its true significance in your developing relationship. Forcing conversation feels immediately inauthentic. When responses come slowly or seem brief, resist bombarding him with multiple follow-up messages. This anxious pattern signals insecurity rather than genuine connection. Patience demonstrates confidence. Send your messages, then give him space to respond naturally without pressure. Copy pasting generic romantic messages fails catastrophically. Men develop immediate emotional radar for messages that could apply to anyone. Each text should contain specific references only meaningful between you two. Generic thinking of you templates lack the personal resonance that makes this approach effective. Emotional manipulation through jealousy or artificial scarcity destroys trust instantly. Mentioning other interested people or creating false urgency might trigger temporary reaction, but permanently damages connection foundation. True emotional disclosure happens through safety, never threat. Overanalyzing his responses creates disconnect between your messages. Reading too deeply into word choice, punctuation, or response timing leads to overthinking rather than authentic exchange. Focus on genuine communication rather than searching for hidden meanings in every character. Jumping too quickly to relationship labels after emotional confession creates pressure that often triggers retreat. Men particularly need time processing emotional vulnerability before discussing formal relationship status. Pushing for immediate definition after confession feels like emotional bait and switch. Sending these messages while intoxicated undermines their effectiveness completely. Alcohol-influenced texts lack emotional precision and often reveal themselves through subtle language patterns. This approach requires emotional intelligence impossible when judgment is impaired. Using this technique without genuine feelings becomes painfully obvious. Attempting to manufacture connection where none exists leads to stilted, awkward exchanges. This approach amplifies existing emotions. It cannot create them where none exist. Excessive preparation makes messages feel rehearsed rather than spontaneous. Having general approach in mind works better than memorizing exact phrases. Natural imperfections in wording and timing contribute to authenticity. Perfect execution paradoxically feels less genuine. Screenshots shared with friends for analysis during these exchanges violates emotional intimacy. Something fundamentally changes when private conversation becomes group project. Maintain sacred space between just you two during these vulnerable exchanges. Attempting this technique through social media rather than private messaging undermines its effectiveness completely. Public or semi-public platforms create social performance awareness that prevents emotional authenticity. Direct messaging creates psychological safety necessary for vulnerability. Giving up after one attempt indicates misunderstanding how emotional disclosure works. Some people need multiple opportunities to process and express feelings. True emotional connection often happens gradually rather than in single dramatic moment. Patience reveals whether genuine feelings exist beneath hesitation. Late night conversations hold special power. They create space for truths that daylight conversations rarely reach. These texts work because they align with natural human psychology, not because they manipulate or trick. They simply create perfect conditions for honesty that already exists beneath the surface. When used with genuine intention, this approach transforms tentative connections into something deeper. The timing, specific wording, and emotional pacing all work together to create moments of real intimacy, even through simple text messages. What makes these 3 a.m. texts so effective isn't some magical formula. It's their ability to bypass the overthinking that prevents emotional honesty during regular hours. They access that quiet, authentic part of us that knows exactly how we feel beneath all our complicated defenses. The right message at the right time can change everything between two people who already share real connection. That moment when he finally expresses what he's been feeling becomes a turning point neither of you will forget. If this approach helped you create a breakthrough in your relationship, hit that like button right now. Subscribe to our channel for more relationship insights that actually work in the real world. Turn on notifications so you never miss our next video. Your relationship journey continues here.